3 narcissistic red flags in child custody. Now, I'm going to talk about this from the perspective of the children, what the red flags that we see in the interactions with the children that indicate that you're dealing with a high conflict or narcissistic person. Before we talk about the 3 red flags, let me just remind you, if you like this content and find it helpful, don't forget to hit like on this video. Also, please subscribe to the channel so that you get notified as new videos are released. That also helps me. So, you help me, I help you, I create the content, you subscribe to the channel. That's the dynamic, okay? So please do that for me. All right, so 3 red flags, let's talk about them. Okay, the first one is, I think that the children often experience love bombing just like we do, right? They experience that cycle of, oh, you're so great, oh, you're so wonderful, you're so awesome, and that feels so good. And then they get the same type of devaluation that we get as well. They either the parent withdraws affection or does different things to demonstrate their disapproval in various behaviors and situations. So again, it becomes a cycle for the kids. And that can be a little scary because I've talked about this recently in one of my podcast episodes that that is a biochemical reaction that's created for us between the love bombing and the devaluing, and how that kind of creates a chemical reaction in your body. So it actually starts creating little chemical reactions in their bodies, and we don't want them to get addicted to that reaction, right? Which is what happened with us. So what you want to do is to really try to be a consistent parent in your world, right? Where we're not running hot and cold, where we're not invalidating their feelings or, giving them approval only when they're doing things we like or whatever. We don't want to repeat those patterns. We want to make sure that we're very consistently carrying out the parenting on our end. And that will help to counter some of that, because that chemical cycle will stop during your parenting time, right? And so the children will have breaks from that if that's what's happening. And they will also start to be able to identify that something isn't right in the other world, right? They won't understand all the dynamics of exactly what that is, but they'll know that something's not right. And the awareness of that will start to cause them to go, hey, wait a minute. And you'd be surprised, children pretty young, I've seen them even as young as like 9, 10, 11 start going, something isn't right about my other parent. I think we saw that in Thomas's kids in a lot of ways of just noticing the dynamic between the 2 houses and the way that they would verbalize kind of the chaos versus the calm between the 2 separate houses. Number 2, they often put the children in the middle of what is going on between the 2 of you. So they'll talk to the kids about it, or they'll ask the kids questions about it or whatever. And the kids end up in the middle of these adult conversations that they shouldn't be having any part of, right? And this is where, I talk about therapy for the kids a lot. I think that that's real important, because these are pieces of it that you can't really help your kids with, right? You can't really help your kids as easily recognize that love bombing in the first instance, or that being put in the middle or whatever, that it's inappropriate, that the other parent shouldn't be doing it. And as soon as you start saying those types of things, okay, now you're kind of wedging yourself between the kids and the other parent. That I've seen start being accused of parental alienation and different things like that. So it really is kind of a thin line that you're walking in a lot of ways. And so how do we start to help the kids recognize what healthy behavior patterns are and what shouldn't be happening? And if they are putting the kids in the middle and talking to them about it, a therapist can give the children strategies and help the children find their voice to be able to say, you know what? It makes me uncomfortable when you ask me those questions, or I find it upsetting when you talk to me about the other parent or whatever. And also, if you have a good therapist that's strong and experienced and has a lot of good personality, a lot of good experience, they a lot of times will actually confront the parent that's doing that on the behavior. I've actually seen them, Thomas and I were lucky enough to have one at one point, to where they were willing to confront issues that were coming up. And so that can be a really good asset for you if you can find someone that is willing to do that. But I don't think every therapist is willing to do that. I've seen therapists that are the opposite, have their own issues going on, and they kind of shy away from that confrontation, especially with a narcissistic person if they feel afraid of them or different things like that. So you do want to find somebody that's a little bit more experienced. I know it's hard when we're talking about working with kids. A lot of times kids relate to younger people. So I think a lot of times we see younger therapists with kids, but honestly, a little bit, at least enough older to where they've had enough experience where they can recognize the dynamic of what's happening is really, really important. I don't think I would want a therapist in their 20s. Nothing against 20-year-olds, and not that some of them aren't great and I'm sure recognize these things, but I think just life experience in general, when you're at least in your 30s and you've had different things happen and you've had enough patience in your practice to where you start to recognize this type of thing. My therapist is older than I am. And, I know that, she had teenagers and different people that she saw that were of all various ages. So it doesn't mean that a child can't work with somebody that's a little bit older. Again, that experience becomes really important in this narcissistic dynamic because, again, when you're very, very young and you just haven't had that experience with people, you just don't really understand how difficult it can be sometimes. The third thing that I think happens is that they're really unable to prioritize the children's needs. This becomes a really difficult thing to try to prove. And what happens with a narcissistic person is they're almost incapable of prioritizing anyone's needs over their own, right? Let alone the children's. Like this isn't specific to the children. This is specific to the narcissistic or high conflict person, that they really put themselves first. And, I was talking to somebody tonight and they were like, why? Why does this happen? Why is this person like this? And I said, it goes back to childhood trauma, I believe. And I think that's kind of the working theory for, most of what's wrong with all of us as adults. But what happens is because of whatever that trauma is, it becomes almost like survival for them. Like, oh my gosh, I've got to control this. I've got to have the upper hand. I've got to make sure that the other person doesn't take the kids from me. I've got to make sure that people think I'm a great person. I've got to make sure that I maintain control. I've got to make sure whatever their particular brand of that need to control and manipulate is, then that's what's going to come through. And that's their way of feeling like they're okay, right? Like like whatever happened as a child, it's like they need to be in control of certain aspects for them to feel safe, to feel like they're okay. And if they don't have enough control to where they feel safe, then they literally feel like they're going to die, right? Like they're like, I'm not going to make it. I'm not safe. Something's going to happen, something terrible. And that causes them to prioritize themselves first. And then what happens is it's not that they're always, I think, trying to harm the people around them, but it becomes collateral damage. It's sort of like, I do this thing and like, yeah, I know all this, there's all this collateral damage around me, but I can't really do anything about it because I've got to survive, right? It's that kind of concept and that kind of feeling. So it's not really about you. It's not really about the kids. It's really about their own emotional survival. Okay. That's the root of it. They just have this inability to prioritize the kids. And honestly, when you have that going on in this situation, in a custody situation, it's really hard to prove that kind of thing. And it's really hard to prove the level of difficulty, damage, whatever you want to call it, that creates for your children. And I usually tell people like a custody eval is one of the few ways to kind of flesh that out when that is happening. And unfortunately, those are, fairly expensive and they're a very involved process. I do a lot of coaching around preparation for custody evals, learning how to, phrase things, learning how to say it in the correct way, say it in a way that the evaluator can actually hear you and listen, and there's very specific techniques that we employ to be able to accomplish that. And sometimes the other thing that happens is you get an attorney for the children. That's the other thing that can happen. If the children are a little bit older, sometimes that will work, although that can be just as expensive as a custody eval. But when the children are younger and they can't verbalize in those ways, usually a custody eval does end up being what you need. Those are kind of the 3 red flags I think we see most commonly with the kids, where they're love bombing the kids, bribing them, doing all those things. They are speaking poorly about you or putting the kids in the middle, talking to them about adult issues or whatever. And then lastly, they are just not able to prioritize the kids' needs. So 3 red flags. If you're dealing with that with your kids, highly likely that you are dealing with a high conflict person on the other side. A lot of times it is narcissistic types of behaviors, but there's all kinds of different high conflict personalities that come into play in these situations. So if you'd like more help deciphering that, learning how to deal with it, learning how to help your kids, you can go to divorceuniversityonline.com/VIP-coaching. There's information on that page on my group coaching programs for moms and for dads. And if you need a higher level of kind of that premium one-on-one support, there's information on that program as well. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you guys next time.